Hey guys, I just started this video, but if you're like, man, your videos are way too long, I can't make it through, where's the results? If you want to know the results of not only this video, which is also in here, but results of the entire dyno session with this LS, which was tested, the AFR Enforcer, obviously, versus the 823, BTR camshaft versus Texas Stage 2 camshaft, Super Victor versus Victor Junior intake, different timing curves, dimpled spacer versus non-dimpled spacer, Dominator versus 4150 spacer. I'm going to put a link in this description, and you can buy all the dyno sheets digital, and I will text them to you. Then you don't have to wait for another video. You don't have to make it through this one. You don't have to make it through the whatever, however long this video takes. Anyway, just something to put out there. Let's get to it. Hey guys, this is Eric Weingartner with Weingartner Racing. Today's video finally has happened. I dyno tested the LS dyno mule. For those that are new to my channel or unfamiliar, I dyno test several different engines and we test different combinations. For instance, I have a small block Chevy dyno mule, although currently it's a little disabled, a big block Chevy dyno mule, and now an LS dyno mule. And I test different things on those. This test, particularly for this video, what was tested was the stock 823 heads versus the AFR LS3 Enforcer heads. Don't confuse them with their CNC ported head. This is their cheaper line of heads. They were dyno tested, and I'm going to give you those results today, and we'll go through everything that's about the engine as well and some of the things that go with it. Before I begin any of that, I want to say this. No company provided any of the parts for the engine that was dyno tested today, as far as like giving me stuff and then I ran it. Almost everything, as far as the cylinder heads for sure, the camshafts, those all came from viewers actually. So what happened is some of the viewers said, hey, could you test this Truck Norris cam, which is the one we tested today, and they had paid for it and sent it in. Same with the AFR LS3 Enforcer heads. The guy had a set of these 823s. He said, could you test them against that? That was from a viewer. That was not from AFR donating them. AFR does donate products to the channel and I have shown those in several dyno videos, but no company gave any parts in this. So this all came from viewers, which brings up the point. If there's something you want to see tested on this LS mule and you've got the part, if I can work it in, I will test it. So for instance, intake manifolds, by far the easiest thing to test. So if you got those and you think, hey, I'd like to see it tested, send it in, I'll test it. And when I'm done, if you want it back, I'll just send it right back to you. But I wanted to get that out of the way. So this all came from them. So what's this LS mule you're talking about, where I am? It's a 408. It's a cast iron 6.0 block. It's not aluminum, which is fine. It has a scat rotating assembly. It's got the scat 4340 forged crank. Scat, I think they're the H-beam rods with the ARP 2000 cap screws. But it has the Icon pistons on the top. Now they're forged and they're rated for a lot of power. Really like them. They got an inboard pin, a little bit thicker pin, I want to say too. They have coated skirts. And also I'm running coated bearings on this, and this also came from a viewer because when I was putting this engine together, I could not get coated bearings. And this guy, he said, I will coat your bearings, and he did, and I've forgotten the name of him. So if you're that guy, please email me in so when I do other videos with this, I can put your name in there. But yeah, he did that. Anyway, the compression ratio is going to end up about 10.9 to 1. It varies between the AFR and the stock LS3 heads because the chamber volume is different by 1 cc. The 823s, which is actually this there right here that got done, they came out at 69.2 cc's. The AFRs came in at 70.2 cc's, so 1 cc difference. So the compression ratio is virtually identical at about 10.9. The camshaft used was a Truck Norris camshaft. I will pop up specs a little bit later on that. But most of you are probably familiar with that camshaft anyway. As far as the induction, the rest of it, the intake manifold that was used was an Edelbrock Victor Junior for a carbureted setup. And you're like, why didn't you do fuel injection? Well, because carburetors are easier. I'm going to say it that way. And I think I found another variable that might affect a lot of you guys when you see comparisons with fuel injected stuff with different manifolds. And I'll get to that here in just a second as well. But it's a carbureted setup and it runs the MSD 6LS box, and that controls the ignition. So for those that are doing this setup, just so you know, and by the way, we didn't even use carb spacers. So for those that asked, at least in this test that I'm showing you today, there's no carb spacers. I did test carb spacers, but it's not in this one. I do want to say something about if you choose to do this, just a little helpful tip for you or hint. If you get the MSD 6LS box, it has these chips that let you put in the timing curve. And initially you put the 6th chip in, and the 6th chip does weird stuff. It also uses map pressure to adjust the timing. That got removed. And here's where I'm going back to the fuel injected stuff. Whenever you have a fuel injected stuff, say like the Holley Terminator or Dominator or whatever, most of the time you have your timing table set up on engine vacuum or boost. So the timing's never flat. So what you can have happen, because this is what actually did happen in one of the earlier tests with this, is if you add or change an intake manifold and it drops the amount of pressure in the manifold, it can, your fuel injected or your timing system itself can retard timing out, and you might have, it looks like it lost power, but really it lost power because of the timing being removed more so than intake manifold change. Why do I say that? Because I know right away when I tell this about the Truck Norris cam, several of you are probably going to be wondering, why didn't you also test another cam? I actually did. And I'm going to put it in another video just because it'll make this one too long. But besides testing the Truck Norris camshaft with the 2 heads, I also tested the Texas Speed camshaft with it, stage 2. But I can't use that as a fair comparison because of what I just told you. But I'll tell you, I'll kind of give you an idea. Initially, we had the 823 heads on, and we had that stage 2 cam in from Texas Speed. And it was making really good power, but when I was with Gary Dunsworth, because we were at Dunsworth Machine Shop, I asked him how much timing it had, and he said it was retarding down to 21 degrees. And I said, what do you mean it was retarding? And he told how the system worked, because I wasn't as familiar with it, and he pulled up the live timing thing, and so we made a pull, because we'd already, by at this point, we changed the Truck Norris camshaft, and I saw exactly what it was talking about. Because it has a map sensor, and like I said, it would retard a different amount depending on where it was in that deal. So we made a few pulls like that. I'm like, there's no way that can make a fair comparison, because if you look at the timing curve from when I had the 823 heads on with the Texas Stage 2 camshaft, and then with the AFR, it wasn't the same. So at that point, and this is the reason why I'm telling you this, this is before I switched to the AFR enforcer heads. This was still in the stock 823 heads. I went in there, so if you got the MSD 6LS box, here's what you need to do. Pull out the chip, go into your computer program, and then you could adjust your timing to your curve however you want, but my best recommendation is to make it linear. In other words, make it ignore the map sensor and base the timing strictly on RPM. So in that case, the reason why I'm telling you this is because I set the timing at straight 29 degrees. And from that point on, so once the Truck Norris camshaft got put in with the stock 823 heads, it was 29 degrees flat. So this way it wouldn't be the timing that it might have been making less power or more power. They were the exact same timing curve for each setup. Fuel injection setups, most people don't do that. I'm just saying, most people on fuel injection do not do that. And like I said, I think that affects the power. So what I'm trying to say is, I did test 2 camshafts, but it's not a fair comparison with the Texas Speed one. The one I'm showing you today with the Truck Norris camshaft between the AFR enforcer and the 823 heads, they had the exact same timing curve. So the only variable that was changed, the only one, I gotta reference this because people only hear part of my videos, they were exactly the same timing curve. The only thing that changed was the cylinder head. So I just wanted to bring that up. So I told you I was going to test 2 camshafts. I did, but I don't want to show it in this one because it's not a fair comparison. The Truck Norris camshaft used on the 2 heads absolutely is. But let's show you the results. Go ahead. Okay, before I get to the results, I do want to talk about the heads themselves, the 823 heads, and what has changed on them. So A stock 823 head looks like this. I mean, after they come off, because usually the time you get them, they've got like 100,000 miles or more on them. So I will say I did redo the head, so they got freshened up. So instead of having a valve job like this, you can go back and watch it, but I have done a valve job on the heads. These are the ones that got used. I did a valve job, just my 5-angle, nice valve job, and I blended them. No real port work. Don't get it confused with port work. Did do a valve job, and then they were surfaced. So that's the big thing. So instead of, I mean, obviously could run it that way. It probably wouldn't seal up and wouldn't work right. So surfacing, valve job. I did flow them before and after, and I'll show you those results for the flow numbers after I show you the dyno results. The other thing was, obviously, this now has the BTR spring kit on it that goes with the truck Norris camshaft. It's got the steel retainer. It's not even titanium. So that's it. Other than that, they're stock, and I'll be happy to show them the flow-wise. Speaking of which, this is how tight the quench was. Didn't even mean to make it that tight, but let's see if the camera can focus there. You see those marks? Yeah, let me do my best. Yeah, that's from the piston. Those are those circular lines like that. That's the top of the piston. So the piston's just kissing it. And you can tell I ran an 041 head gasket. So it's pretty tight, pretty tight. Anyway, let's get to the results. Okay, this is our 823 heads, Victor Jr. intake, 1000 CFM Demon carburetor, no spacer, and truck Norris camshaft. I'm going to tell you right now, ignore this air-fuel ratio because the hat wasn't all the way, which means these airflow numbers aren't right. It's about 12.5, 12.8. This looks a little worse. So just ignore those. Those calculators, not from an 02. And because the air hat didn't sit perfectly, it moved around, it threw those numbers off. And I actually think something's wrong with the blades up at the top anyway. Anyway, I made 560 horsepower, and it did it at 6,100 RPMs. And torque came in at 528 at 4,800 RPMs. So how do I know, by the way, that the air-fuel ratio is close? It's in the 4s. Gets a little rich at the top, so that's probably not that far off. Well, actually probably is. This is probably closer to 12.2. So it's a little rich there at the top, which is weird. It never did that on, this carburetor's been on so many different engines, never did that. So maybe that is an LS thing, or this is, well, could be possible. No, I just don't have an answer for that one, but it's not that far off. So again, probably could have done with the jetting, but the carburetor was never changed for any of the testing, exactly the way it was for the next set of heads too. So could I have jetted for a few more power? Yes. But I can tell you right now, it is not 10-8 to 1. Otherwise, when you listen to the video, you would have heard it missing, cutting up down low. It never did. It's clean. The air hat's off, I promise you. But good power. In case you wonder what it looks like on a curve, this is the curve. It's pretty good. I mean, it's pretty nice. It's not a bad deal at all. But really, the question is, well, how good did it do compared to the AFRs, right? Here's your AFRs. AFR enforcers, same intake, Victor Jr., 1000 CFM Demon carburetor, BTR camshaft. We look now, we made 568, we can call it at 6,300, and torque's 536. You can see the air-fuel ratio on this looks way rich. This, I mean, the air hat's off. Because you look here, these numbers are about the same. It's maybe a tick richer, but it's not like, that would have been missing and popping. There's no way this is correct. That's what I'm trying. There's no way at 10.0, zero way that's correct. Sorry, zero. It's still probably a little rich at the lower RPMs. It gets pretty sweet in the middle here where the torque is, and then it starts getting a little rich. Again, I don't know why it's doing this with the LS engine when it never did with a small block, big block Chevy, none of them. But same with the other one. But that's pretty close. So if you look at the power, you're like, I didn't see like I gained that much. Well, you're right. After this, because when we just got done making this pool, I thought, Gary thought too, did we change anything? Because this looks like almost identical. I'm like, yeah, it's changed heads. And I'm going to show you the flow numbers for these heads too and other information you can kind of compare yourself. But after that, we like, well, let's see if our temperatures were the same. The water was, but the oil was cooler. So what we did is we made another pool with the water at the same temperature, but the oil at the same temperature as 823s. That's what got us this final curve. Here's your difference. The red line are the AFR enforcers. The black lines are stock 823 heads. So when we got the oil temperature up, it went to 571 with the AFR enforcers, 536 on torque, so about the same. So if we look at that, it gained over the entire curve in the entire thing. But this gain is about 8 to 10. And that's at peak. So like here, it's probably 8 to 10. Here, it's not as much, obviously. Matter of fact, let's just go and see. A second, here we go. So if we look at 60, well, we'll do 63. 567 on the AFR, 564. That's only 3. And that's so close, it's hard to measure. Remember, exact same timing curve. So getting back to this, you're like, why did that happen? Because when we show you the flow numbers, I'm gonna show you those in just a second. The AFRs really do outflow them, but we'll get to that. Yeah, virtually no change. It did gain some, but just to give you an idea, because whenever we got done doing this, Gary's like, it kind of supports the whole get the 823 heads and have them redone. Because in all fairness, and it's gonna sound like I'm a machinist and I'm trying to sell you something because I did do all this work. If you redo the valve job, blend it, surface the heads, put on the new spring kit, you're into it about $1,000, I'd say, on the high side, maybe 1,100, and that's on the high side. The AFR enforcer heads, right now, I think they're $1,500 for a set. So you'd save yourself about $400 getting these, and you'd only be down 3 horsepower. I know, hate to say it, but that's assuming you already had the heads. So if you didn't have the heads and you had to go on Facebook Marketplace to get those, might be a different case. So you might be asking, well, did you change anything on the AFR and enforcer heads though? I actually did. This is what I changed. Here are the spring specs on the stock AFR enforcer heads. If you look, it's 137 pounds on the seat. That's just too light for what I'm doing. They may have actually been fine with the truck Norris camshaft. But since we also switched to that Texas Speed camshaft, I just didn't want it to have any chance of valve float at the higher RPMs that we knew that Texas Speed would take it to. So instead of risking it, pretty much every head that I'm going to test, so like these 823s, which I'm going to show you at specs in a second, and all the other Pro Maxes and BR3 heads and anything else, they're all about 160 pounds on the seat. So I wanted to get there, so I set it up like this. This is how they are now. So this is the AFR enforcers. All I did was put some shims underneath the bottom to get that seat pressure up. As you can tell, it's up like where it should be. And that's how it was exactly ran. So that was the only change that was done to the AFR enforcer heads was the spring pressures. And here's how I set up the springs for the stock 823 heads. Remember, this is the BTR spring kit that actually comes with the truck Norris cam if you order it that way. Steel retainer and all. So you can kind of get an idea of what you're looking at. Okay, for now, for the guys that are wondering to know, trying to figure out why did it not have a bigger influence, I'm going to give you information and then you can make some informed decisions on your own. First off, this is actually the flow numbers between the 823s. So in stock form like this, they actually flowed this. This right here is what they were dynoed at. This is after the valve job and just blending. So it did change flow numbers, not going to lie to you. This was flowed on the Signs digital 680 bench, 430 bore, no exhaust pipe. So this is just redoing the valve job and blending it. So this is what the final flow numbers are. This right here is the difference. We can see how much CFM did it gain or did it lose or did it do anything. So if you look, we lost 2 there, gained 6, gained 2, lost about 3 at 4. Isn't that a great thing? That's almost a wash at 5. 550, it gained 1.3. It did gain quite a bit at 6. At 6, it gained 10.1. Now with this truck Norris camshaft, its specs look like this. So it didn't even have a 600 lift, but I'm showing you anyway just because I think you should know. I had to grab my pen again and forgot it. Now the rest of this, and some of you still think it's not important to flow all the way up, it tells how stable the port is, and we can see it gains, you know, up in the upper lifts quite a bit. The exhaust side, that's a loss, huge gain there at 3, and a huge gain there at 4 as well, and it peaks out about 215. But the real question is, well, how's that even compare then to the AFR enforcers? Good news, I've got them right here. So we're gonna put them right next to each other. So here we have, these are the AFR enforcers. Now, the AFR enforcers have a 208 intake valve and a 1600 exhaust valve. So a much, much smaller intake valve and a much larger, well, not much larger, but a larger exhaust valve. So we look, AFR enforcers are up at 1, really up at 2, huge 10 CFM at 3, at 4, that's 14 CFM gain at 5. It's about a 10 at 6 now, or 550. I mean, that's still about 9. At 6, we are at 329 versus 322, so it's starting to close. And then above it, and this is the reason why we flow all the way up, 1 inch is 312 to a 314. That's about what we'd see for the power difference. The reason why we flow it all the way up. 309 to a 311. So when the air is really, really moving, they're moving about the same amount of air, about the same amount of power. How about the exhaust side? 53 versus 52, that's a wash. This is actually down at 200. This is also down compared to the stock one on the exhaust side there. At 400, it's down almost 18. And yeah, it's just down except for at peak at 1 inch, it's about, or 9, I guess, because I couldn't get to 1 inch. 214 to a 215. Something else to notice about this is the AFR enforcer heads, their valve is moved over. So it's off the bore, and that's the reason why it has better flow at the 400 inch. So it's a, if you look at it from like, if you're just looking at flow numbers, airflow wise, this thing should have stomped the dog crap out of this, because people talk about discharge coefficient and velocity. Let's talk about that one too. This port's 238 cc's. It's almost the same length as the LS3. This is 259 cc's. This is 20 cc's smaller. Which one do you think has more velocity? The AFR enforcer. You would figure with that much more in velocity, smaller valve, so it's got the better discharge coefficient, it should make a ton more torque at the lower. It made 8 or 9. So for those that are like beating the death on velocities, it's only one part of it. Coefficient discharge, you guys are beating to death on that. It's only part of it. Flow numbers, it's only part of it. And you could tell because they were so close. So, but there's more data than just that. So let me just get to the rest of it. So let's go on. Swirl. Let's talk about swirl. This is the swirl with the AFR enforcers. Now this is going to be weird because if you look at this right here are the swirl numbers. So these are negative. This is the stock 823. If you look, it has very, because people think LS3s have a lot of swirl. They do not. Nope, hardly any compared to a small block Chevy, Ford, well, Ford, yeah, even compared to them. It doesn't have any swirl, and you can see it. This is how much this, it's the RPM that this little vane or little blade inside my flow bench turns. 377, 691, 0. It's not moving at all. It's going straight down. So it's coming straight out here at the valve, just whoop, dumping. 0. 27, that's almost 0. 0. 44. Then from 600 on, that's when it picks up. That's also, by the way, about the time that the flow starts reverse. How about compared to the AFR enforcer? This one actually has swirl. No swirl. Swirl. Because look at this. 400, 800. I mean, let's go to 3. It has 678 versus 0. So there's no doubt about this, that the AFR enforcer has more swirl. More swirl, more torque. That's what you heard, right? It's one part of it, and evidently not a big one. So something to think about. However, if you look at, yeah, even then, at peak, 2700 to 2556. At peak, this one actually has more swirl. But remember, we're only like 550 lift, and at that point, because this is the truck North camshaft, 44. It's not moving at all. It's not swirling. Compared to at 550 on this, 825. So it is moving some. And if you look at the chambers, yeah, there's no swirl. It just isn't happening. Now, that's great and all, but what about the the measurements from it? Didn't you do any of the measurements? Sure did. This is the stock 823 head at a 69.2 cc chamber. Its intake port volume was 259 cc's, 259.4 really. And I actually did velocity measurements. So this is over the short side. This will all be in a book that you can pre-order, and I'm going to put it in the description. And then, let's see, through the center of the push rod, it's 255. That's measured with a pitot tube. These are all just numbers you're just like, whoa, you're losing me. Gotcha. Really, you guys just care more about that. Exhaust volume is 85 cc's. What about the enforcer? I'm going quick. 238.4. So it's obviously, it's smaller. It's smaller by 20. Exhaust though is 92 compared to the 85. So it's a larger exhaust port. Chamber, like I said, it's 1 cc difference. 70.2 cc's came in instead of 69.2. And if we look at the flow through the pinch, so this is very, let me show you where that would be. It's right in the center here. That's what I'm trying to get, right through the center. 305 versus the 255. So the velocity is much slower on the 823s. And I would think it would make a huge difference, but like I've already showed you, it wasn't that much of a difference. These are the measurements from inside the port, in case you're wondering. You can keep that for your data too. This is from the 823s as well if you want that. This will all be in the book that you could pre-order now on my website. It's not cheap and we'll have more than just this. However, like I said probably at the beginning of the video, if you just want all the dyno sheets from this session, which here's what else was tested. The Texas Speed was tested on the AFR enforcer heads. I'm going to tell you it made 641 horsepower with that. So that was a huge gain from the cam, not from the heads. Also tested 2 different manifolds, the Super Victor versus the Victor Junior. Dimpled spacer again versus the tapered. Dominator versus the 4150. And some timing changes as well, a bunch of stuff. That you can actually purchase now. It's on my website. You can just get the digital copy. I can just text you all the sheets so you don't have to wait for another video to come out to see it. But there's some information for you. Hopefully you guys got something out of this video. If you have questions or comments, put them down there. I'd be happy for it. Thanks for all the viewers that did this. And we're not done testing. There's still several sets of heads to test. There's a set of Brodix BR3s that I've somewhat ported. Those are an LS3 head. And ProMax small bore LS3 head. That one's going to be good because compression's going to come away with that one. And then the ProMax large bore is going to be tested as well. If I can find shaft rockers, because this is a really great question. I've got a set of ported. I ported a set of 243 heads for a customer. And those are cathedral heads. And I'm curious to see how they would compare against these stock 823 heads. All I got to do is right now. So if someone had rockers right now, I'd probably dyno test that one. So the stand and the rockers, that one probably be dyno tested. Once I have enough money to dyno test, because I need to sell some of these books so I can get back on the dyno. Because right now I'm tapped out. So until I get some money from the books and stuff, I ain't going to be back on the dyno for a while. So anyway, guys, thanks for watching. Remember, I am no Superman. You guys take care.